the fellows as well as our committee chairs. And tonight we're honored to welcome tonight's faculty. So discussing career development and webinar tonight, we have Berkely Limketkai and Ryan McConnell. We're going to start out with Dr. McConnell. Dr. McConnell is an inflammatory bowel disease specialist at the Palo Alto Medical Foundation, which is a large multidisciplinary group practice in the Bay Area. He trained at the University of Pennsylvania for internal medicine residency and served as chief medical resident. He then completed general gastroenterology and advanced inflammatory bowel disease fellowships at the University of California, San Francisco. He made the difficult decision to leave academia and was recruited to PAM for the Palo Alto Medical Foundation in 2017 to build a community-based IBD-focused clinical practice. Unique aspects of his current practice include outpatient IBD clinic preceptorship for the CPMC GI Fellows, which we enjoy very, very much, membership in the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation's IBD National Quality Improvement Network, and participation in IBD clinical trials. He also serves on the Immunology, Microbiology, and Inflammatory Bowel Disease section of the American Gastroenterological Association Institute Council, which directs the AGA's IBD-related programming at Digestive Disease Week. So thank you, Dr. McConnell. He'll start out sharing his slides.
Thanks, Anne. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the group's invitation to come and join tonight. And you said many things that I already have in my slide deck, so thank you for giving a great preview of my career development talk. Really, it's a pleasure to be here. I recognize the names from the fellows. Thanks everyone for taking the time out to spend some time tonight. And hopefully between Berkely and I know Berkely, he's very approachable. I hope people think I'm very approachable. And we would like to make this as interactive as possible to answer your questions and make this as high yield for all of you. So if we're not covering what you are wondering about, please feel free to chat in or talk to us so we can make sure we answer your questions. So with that preface, I'll take you through a few slides that I'm shamelessly reusing for when I did a career development talk for fourth year IBD fellows. So everything on here is really about the IBD pathway. I want you to cross out IBD when you read my slides and think about gastroenterology. I hope that I can make these lessons applicable to any career that you are thinking about within the field of GI. But I'll sort of take you through my own experience of my career development and how certain things came to be and some of the factors that I think might be important takeaways as you're at your stage of fellowship thinking about possible career choices. So as Anne said, I am a community-based IBD-focused provider, which is a bit of an unusual field. Usually IBD is in academia doing things like Berkely is doing at UCLA. So I hope that my path might inspire others because we certainly need more IBD-focused people outside of academia where many of our IBD patients actually live and get their care. So brief overview of my career path that Anne touched on. I thought I was going to be an orthopedic surgeon in high school. I was going to run out on the football field and take care of all the injured players. But then I was diagnosed with Crohn's during my senior year of high school. And when I went to undergrad and med school in Houston, I really started to have a great relationship with my gastroenterologist and started to think more about how taking care of IBD might make a nice career given my own personal experience. So I went to Penn for internal medicine residency and did a year as a ICU hospitalist before fellowship. And then I came to UCSF really wanting to pursue IBD as a career. And Dr. Mahadevan at UCSF was very generous in allowing me to get the fourth year seal of approval in my regular 3 years of training. So it was just a 3-year fellowship, but I came out with the IBD certificate. And my plan was to stay in academia and do IBD QI type stuff. That was my goal all through fellowship. So here is me and Uma graduating with my nice certificate as an advanced IBD practitioner in the days before COVID when we were in a very crowded room with no masks. That'll be all of you, hopefully very soon. So what's the reality? The reality is, you have to know what you want. And one of my goals, being married with children and my wife working in the Bay Area, was that I wasn't doing a job hunt all over the country. we really wanted to stay in the Bay Area. And there are not a lot of academic IBD opportunities in the Bay Area in any given year. And there wasn't anything the year that I was looking to get a job. So this became a scramble for me, wondering, what do I do? Do I follow my dreams into academia? Do we move the family? Or do I start looking for other pathways to do IBD within the Bay Area? And, I really lucked out. My career development talk is basically a good opportunity fell into my lap at the time that I needed something. So one of my first lessons to you all is that unexpected things might happen, and you might just want to seize the moment and not being afraid of deviating from the way you may have envisioned things going. So this job opening at Palo Alto Medical Foundation became open through a retirement the year that I was graduating. And the program actually approached me and said, look, we'd like to have subspecialization in our multi-specialty group. We're hiring an interventional endoscopist to build an advanced endoscopy program. We have a hepatologist. We want you to be our IBD person and grow and develop an IBD program. So this was a very supportive and visionary division chief who was selling me on this vision. And I felt, this is a vision I can buy into. This makes a lot of sense. And I'll explain on the subsequent slides why it kind of made sense and what factors you might think about when you're evaluating opportunities. But still, for me, this was a huge leap of faith. Like, I was going to be academics, and the idea of working anywhere else wasn't on my radar. So could I really wrap my head around this? So this is not to sort of sell you on Palo Alto Medical Foundation, but just an overview of the kinds of groups that are out there, because I realize in fellowship, you've probably been in academics your whole career during internal medicine residency and fellowship, and practicing outside of academia may not be something that you've thought about or have a lot of familiarity with the kinds of GI opportunities that are out there. So this is one possible opportunity in California. You could work for a big group. So Palo Alto Medical Foundation is a part of Sutter Health, which has lots of acute care hospitals, more than 200 outpatient clinics all over Northern California, you see on the map here. It's a huge group. So when you're a subspecialist, like a gastroenterologist, or a subspecialist within a specialized field like IBD or hepatology, your patients come from your referring providers. So being in a large group with lots of primary care doctors, lots of patients, this sort of is the body of work that you need to be able to see the kinds of patients that you're looking to see. So I like the idea of a big group that had over 2 million patients. And then it didn't hurt that this group that I was being recruited into had a nice reputation and was felt to be a desirable place to work in the Bay Area. And they had a research institute, which sort of spoke to my academic side. Not hard to be sold on these beautiful Silicon Valley located practices that are you walk in and you look like it's a luxurious hotel. This wasn't what I was used to in the world of academia and dirty hospital lobbies. So, there is a bright side to the world beyond academia in terms of curb appeal. So my particular practice is in the Silicon Valley area in Palo Alto. We have a growing number of IBD patients, very cosmopolitan and tech-savvy, data-driven patients. And my particular practice, my group, I'm one of 9 MDs. We have 5 nurse practitioners, one of whom has an IBD focus. We have a medical assistant, and we just got a prior authorization coordinator. So I'm, again, not saying this to toot my own horn, but to have you think about what kind of team might you need in place to deliver the kind of care that you're looking to achieve. What are some of the things that you might ask from your division chief as you're growing a program and trying to support your practice? So my job, this slide I should have edited a little bit. I'm 100% IBD now. When I gave this talk a few months ago, I was 80-20. So, what would you like to see in terms of your patient population and molding it in your own image? We're kind of spoiled with the 4-day work week, where I do 2.5 days of endoscopy at our on-site surgery center, 1.5 days of IBD clinic, and then the 5th day is by no means a day off. It's a day to do inbox, charting, very much working from home, but not seeing new patients, which is really nice. I share call with my colleagues, so we take about 1 week of call out of 8. I was able to ask for 60-minute new patient visits for IBD patients. So thinking about how much time are you going to need to see the patients that you want to see. I manage my own IBD panel. I see a lot of complex second opinions that might otherwise go to the local academic places. I still stoke my own academic desires by having privileges at Stanford Hospital. We have 4 infusion centers, which was an important component of taking care of IBD patients who are on biologic therapies. And we've been able to grow, hiring an IBD-focused nurse practitioner. Just this year, hired a prior authorization coordinator, working on some legitimacy in the form of a title as director of IBD. All things that I would say are good things to think about for whatever kind of practice you might be in. But what is, my daughter got her flu shot and she's proud of her pink Band-Aid. Good job, babe. Job satisfaction. So what is good about my current job? There's a huge need that we're filling for community-based IBD expertise. So whatever career that you're going into, are you filling a niche? And are you filling a niche in the area where you're practicing? There was definitely a gap for IBD care outside of academia in my neighborhood. It's been fun and challenging to develop and grow a program rather than to step into an already existing program as just the latest cog in the wheel. But that's its own source of challenges too in trying to build your own program. So there are 2 sides to this coin. Are you joining a mature practice in a mature role, or are you taking something on where you're going to have to work out the kinks and develop things and troubleshoot? I think that's another good thing to think about for whatever kind of program you might be joining. I'm still able to do academic type things, which is important to me. I've published some papers. I've been an invited peer reviewer on IBD papers. I get to teach Anne and her co-fellows when they come to my clinic for GI IBD days. We've been able to participate in phase 3 clinical trials for new IBD therapies. I joined a monthly IBD of the West case conference society where we meet once a month with all the IBD centers west of the Mississippi and talk about interesting cases and troubleshoot challenges in our practice. We are part of IBD Chorus for the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation, which is a quality improvement collaborative. So getting to network with other sites and talk to other IBD providers, so I don't feel like I'm alone and by myself doing it all as a one-person show. And Anne alluded to working with the AGA. The ACG is another area where you can remain involved in academia and service to our GI societies. I'm an abstract reviewer for DDW, and then was working on the local Crohn's and Colitis Foundation medical committee before they shifted their organizational structure. So these are things that might give you ideas of ways that you could remain involved in academic type things, even outside of an academic center. So what's tough about being in a job like this? Well, molding a program from the ground up, growing pains. We had problems. We didn't have a colorectal surgeon when I started. That's a problem when you try to build an IBD practice. And if insurance wouldn't allow the patient to go to Stanford or UCSF, how are we going to access expert care? So we were able to fortunately hire a fantastic surgeon. Prior authorizations, things you may not be privy to as a fellow that just sort of happen in the back office. This is the reality of trying to get care accomplished for your patients when you're running the show is, how do you deal with things like scheduling and insurance authorizations, and what's the process for overcoming this? I miss having you guys, fellows. I don't have fellows in my clinic outside of 1 day a month to write notes. So I realize fellows are way more than scribes, but now I'm looking back at my time with Uma thinking, wow, she had 2 fellows and an NP in her clinic. No wonder she could see so many patients. When you're writing all the notes yourself, that goes into consideration for how many patients you can really see in a day and how much work do you think you can complete. Every patient you see then becomes a patient who's writing you inbox messages, you're responding to their labs. So managing this whole other aspect of the practice that doesn't generate any revenue, but is very important for patient satisfaction and good patient care is something that I think everyone will see as a challenge in their career is how do you take on this virtual medicine and balance it with the work that you're doing in the clinic? Advocating for your needs, how do you convince your division chief or your colleagues or your partner organization that you need resources and who's going to pay for it? And then if you're in a if you're in a primarily cognitive-based field in GI, where more of the emphasis is on office visits and less on procedures, how's that going to impact the bottom line? And how do you get paid? Are you salaried? Are you paid based on RVUs, which is your productivity? And in a field like IBD, your productivity is generally lower than somebody who's doing colonoscopy all day. And are you okay seeing complex, challenging patients and making less money than your colleagues? Like, can your ego withstand that? So pearls and pitfalls for building your own practice, or joining a practice to play a niche role. A lot of practices want somebody with your skill set, whether it's hepatology or IBD or EUS, ERCP. Is there a need for that skill set in this practice? What's the patient population? Do they actually see a lot of hepatology patients, or do you do a lot of EUS if they want you to come and bring your EUS skills? Do you see a lot of IBD? So I would say look for any mismatch in the kind of patients that you see and the skills that you're wanting to do. And then, can your organization support you? Now, for IBD, I've alluded to the fact that we lean on a lot of other things. We do prior authorizations, we do infusions, we refer to a number of other colleagues. I had never thought, can my radiologist read an enterography? Is it CT or MR enterography? How good is my pathologist? Do I have a dietitian? Can I even get methylene blue to do chromoendoscopy? Things that I took for granted in fellowship. And there will be things in other fields that you might think about too for building your practice. What are the pieces that you need to succeed? So my conclusion was something like an IBD specialist is not going to work in a small group. If you're being recruited into a group of 2 people to be the third, they're going to want you to be on call 1 out of 3 and help see a third of all the new referrals. And you're not really going to be able to carve out your focused practice. So be aware of what the practice can accommodate in terms of your skill set. How supportive is leadership? What are their expectations for you? Are you going to have time to do what you want to do? Is there support for the other aspects of the program beyond just you as the gastroenterologist? Will your compensation be adjusted in any way to acknowledge the expertise that you're bringing into this group? I left this slide in here just as this was more for the advanced IBD fellows when I gave the talk, but there are papers out there in practice management that you might gloss over now when you look at journals as fellows. You're probably looking at what's new in terms of guidelines and what's new in terms of cutting edge research for how we care for certain diseases. But the whole idea of practice management, how do you run your practice? This paper is about how you do prior authorization for IBD. These are things that might seem more like the boring back office type stuff during fellowship, but become very relevant for your success if you're in a non-academic practice. Another sort of practice management type paper about how relative value units undervalue the cognitive physician. And I have the 2021 RVU schedule for consults versus new patients versus established patients, level 1, level 2, level 5. How many RVUs do you get? RVUs might mean nothing to you in fellowship. It meant nothing to me. I ignored it. I thought coding was so boring. Why would you want to learn coding? But the reality of my current life is that I'm compensated exclusively based on how many RVUs I produce. So that means how many colonoscopies you do. Each colonoscopy is 4 or 5 RVUs, depending on whether it's a cold snare or a forceps. Here's the RVUs for various consults versus new patient levels. This is basically the world of non-academia. When you're not salaried, this is how you get paid. So this talk is not all about how do you make money in gastroenterology, but you want to know how you get paid, and you want to know how this might factor into your decision making about your capacity to see patients and the balance of procedures versus office visits. So my advice is start thinking about this and learning about coding. If it's been a total black box to you, I think it's worth learning a little bit about it in fellowship, because this will become a sudden slap in the face when you're finished and you have to start coding your own charts. So this is like, how do you get a name out for yourself? You're now out of fellowship, you have a job. How do people get to know that you exist and send you patients? So my advice is be available. Accept urgent requests, even if you don't think it's urgent. Take calls and texts from your colleagues when they're reaching out to help. You want to be available. know who you're going to turn to ask for help and guide you, who's going to mentor you as you leave fellowship and realize you have all these questions about challenging patients and your attendings aren't there anymore. Who do you turn to? How do you become an expert? Number one, provide excellent patient care. Make your patients happy, write good notes, communicate in a timely way with the referring physicians. If everybody's happy, they're going to continue to want to seek you out. Get your name out there. You can do grand rounds at whatever group you're a part of. You can do patient education talks in the community. You can speak to primary care doctors about a GI topic. Even things like colon cancer screening that might not be your interest. You know, if they hear of you and they know you're new in the organization and you give a good talk, people are going to start to know who you are and send you patients. You can get affiliated with your local specialty society for whatever subspecialty you're pursuing. You could participate in clinical trials. You could become a speaker for pharma, which seems like a huge sellout. So I'll tread lightly here, but you know, I speak for some pharmaceutical companies, and I do it because it helps establish you as a content expert in your community. And you go out at dinner and you give a talk to some other local gastroenterologists, they get to know who you are. You get to show them what you know about your field, and you get some credibility as being somebody that you know, people look to you as somebody who knows what they're talking about. Seeking salary support, I alluded to. I think there's another talk you'll have in this series about contract negotiation. I mentioned learning coding nuances. Keeping current is an ongoing strategy. You don't want to be that dinosaur who left fellowship 20 years ago and still practices with 20-year-old gastroenterology knowledge. So you got to attend meetings, read journals, somehow do this with a semblance of work-life balance with your families. So I found ways to combine my family, and we just read gastroenterology at bedtime every night. Joke. And then my last slide is, you know, there are bad days. There are bad days in fellowship. There are bad days in your career. Burnout's a real thing. It's been a thing during COVID in general. Don't get burned out. My pearl is keep the notes that your patients send you. If you get a thank you note through an online message, if someone writes you a card, save them, pin them on a bulletin board, and look at them on bad days and remind yourself, this is why I do what I do. Not for all the bad things that happen, but for the people that, you know, the letters that people send that reflect how happy they are with your care. That will mean a lot to you at the end of the day. So thank you for indulging me. I hope that this was somewhat in the vein of what you wanted to hear about tonight. And I look forward to Berkeley's talk and then questions. Thanks a lot.
Great, thank you. If there aren't any urgent questions, we can move on to our second speaker and do questions at the end. So Dr. Berkely Limketkai is an associate clinical professor at UCLA and director of clinical research at the UCLA Center for Inflammatory Bowel Diseases. All right, thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you very much, Anne. And Ryan, thank you very much for that wonderful talk. Just so everyone knows, just a little bit of background, I actually met Ryan when he was an advanced IBD fellow. And, you know, I recall the time you were, you know, thinking about, you know, joining PAMF and your future career. And it's actually so rewarding to hear how you've actually progressed all this time and built up an incredible program there at the Palo Alto Medical Foundation. I'm very pleased to have heard your talk. And I also learn a lot of pearls from what you shared. So I will actually be taking those with me and trying to apply that into my practice as well. So thank you very much for this opportunity to share about life in academia. And I mentioned that there are many paths in Rome, in a sense that academia also provides a lot of flexibility and many phenotypes in which one could actually mold their personalized career. Let's see, how do I advance this? Okay, there we go. And so I preface this brief presentation by saying that there's no one career path. In my training path, I actually went to an institution where they frowned upon anybody who went outside of academia, to the point where some fellows who had signed contracts with, let's say, you know, HMO or private practice, actually didn't share their news or the good news with their mentors at the time, out of fear of being scolded or being felt like they were disappointing their mentors. But that's not my philosophy. And I actually believe that, throughout medicine, what you want to do is you want to identify who you are, what your interests are, and where do you want to go. I view the path towards, be it private practice, be it industry, be it academia, or whatever, business consulting, or whatever you'd want to do, is to actually all be perfectly great as long as it actually aligns well with who you are and where your interests are. So I just like to at least preface it that although I'm actually sharing about academia in this particular presentation, it's by no means, kind of a marketing campaign to say that you need to remain in academia, that this is the only one true path, or that it's actually the best fit for you. Now, as we all know, you have to actually go through the academic institution to get your training. So naturally, the people you interact with most have a selection bias and, are obviously going to be a little bit more biased towards that. But I think, again, most importantly is learn who you are. So in this brief time together, I'll share a little bit about, kind of what does academia entail, different phenotypes involved in this career pathway, some of the promises and pitfalls, and, what my reasons were to kind of continue down this path. And if you do actually decide to stay in academia, what are some things you can do to help climb that ladder? In terms of the pillars of academia, we're all familiar with, the clinical care, the education, and the research facets of it. One that's a little bit less intuitive is it's also the administration part of academia, where one actually rises in leadership, be it becoming division or chief or department chair, or eventually leading the whole healthcare system, or being dean of the School of Medicine. So there's also another career trajectory that's not often discussed, particularly early in training or even early in your faculty years. I want to say that, you would also hear about this traditional paradigm of how you'd split your different responsibilities, such as this 80-20 model, where you would be asked, okay, so what do you want to become? If you say you want to be a clinical educator, that means you're going to be spending 80% of your time in clinical care and, maybe 20% of your time on education and everything else. And if you say you want to be a physician scientist, the expectation is that you say that you would be spending 80% of your time doing research and maybe 20% of your time doing clinical care and a sprinkle of it in education. Now, these are kind of the traditional frameworks of how to view academic roles. So you've heard, again, in some institutions, they actually have very strict divisions between who are considered clinical educators versus clinician scientists or physician scientists. However, the more modern view of academic roles is actually it's more of a combination of where your interests lie and which direction you want to go. And so while some can still be clinical educators by kind of their primary focus, that does not preclude them from engaging in research or trying to rise in the either division or health hospital leadership. And the same also goes for the other kind of distributions of focuses. The challenge, however, is better understanding what your institution permits, what your division chief and your department chair also are, what their vision is for you and your role there, and also what is the kind of the dollars and cents kind of flexibility that you have. And I'll touch a little bit more on that in one of either the pitfalls of academia. So with that in mind, what are some of the promises, or what are some things to love about academia? So one is the diversity of experiences and career tracks. As I showed you the different pillars of academia, there are many different ways that you can get engaged as part of your career. So on one hand, you can spend some time doing clinical care. The other time, you could spend time doing research or discovery. The other time, you could also spend a lot of time doing education or building programs or spending time in leadership or in a whole host of different flexible career tracks. You also have a large community of colleagues, and that's not just in the healthcare system, but also if you're affiliated with like a university, there are also a lot to be able to network with. And at the same time, you also, since you tend to be more engaged on the national level in medical societies or in the community, that also expands your network of collaborators. And universities, almost by definition, have this spirit of innovation. So there's a lot of leeway for building new and novel programs. I mean, Ryan did that, at his institution, which was great. And so that's kind of the sense of what you can do in academia. And there are also a lot of new and interesting projects you can engage in. I would say that the projects or the activities in which I engage from year to year are quite varied, and I actually find that to be quite stimulating, and it also provides a lot of novelty and newness to what you do. And I also mentioned this as also involving a lot of evolving responsibilities. So I also see that over time the functions I had, be it directorship in a certain role or building a certain program or serving in a certain committee, evolves over time as well. And so I've actually also not just been able to contribute in different areas, but also learn a lot of skills along the way. I mentioned here the synergy between practice and clinical and translational research to be actually one of the very rewarding aspects of being in academia, in the sense that, oftentimes we're asked questions by our patients where there really isn't much knowledge or research or data to support our response. But you can't just give them no response. You have to then extrapolate from the existing data to be able to give at least a best guess or an informed extrapolated response to their question. And then from there, you can actually bring those questions back to the lab, or be it the wet lab or the dry lab, and study that and being able to better understand how to better to answer those questions in the future, and or how to kind of integrate that into your practice. And I'll give a few examples momentarily. The other things I really enjoy about academia is actually training the next generation of future leaders, or even practitioners, or the people who will make an impact in their community. I very much enjoy the times I spend with residents, fellows, medical students, and even undergraduate students, and seeing their development, throughout the course of their training. And I do actually find that at the time of the fellows graduation, I always feel that, I always reminisce back at when I first met them as either fellows or as residents, and then I feel like they're like my kids who are just growing up, although I'm not the only parent. And we had like a whole gaggle of faculty members who played an integral role in their development. And you also have the opportunity to be able to train your colleagues, i.e. when you give presentations or lectures at conferences, and also in a community. And for those who seek, I guess, fame, reputation, or whatnot, there's also the opportunity to become a key opinion leader, either on a national or even international scale, and particularly also in areas where you have developed your niche. Now, I shared a lot of great things about academia, but nothing is perfect. And so, what are the underlying pimples and pitfalls of being in academia? I know Ryan touched on the RVU treadmill, which we unfortunately in academia is also some very strong kind of negative factor. And I think that this may be a universal, part of being in a medical profession, or at least in clinical care. The challenge, however, and I'll say, and not to make this sound like terrible, but it is also a disadvantage, is academic institutions tend to be more inefficient as clinical models. So if I were to compare, let's say, I've now actually been at 3 different academic institutions, I've at least been intimately involved in their operations within the GI world, and the turnover of patients, to see like how quick does it take them to get roomed, or pre-op and so forth. And I see like there's kind of that constant internal struggle to try to contain myself, to be patient while waiting for this turnover, and yet already being 2 hours behind, and or even like in clinic and trying to wait for your patient to be roomed, and yet you have all these patients like waiting for you. And with that, though, are these RVU expectations. You have to maintain a certain degree of productivity, but then the model in which you work is not necessarily attuned for efficiency. And so there's that added stressor above and beyond the fact that you need to meet your RVU quotas. And also, if we were to compare ourselves to our, let's say, community-based or private practice colleagues, we also recognize that there is a discount, I guess as a euphemism, of being in academia, and that you actually do get an appreciably lower compensation. We're also beholden, what do I say, to inconsistent leadership, in the sense that in academia, there is there are kind of there is migration, immigration and immigration, amongst leaders, amongst colleagues. It doesn't seem as much as they say that things are changing, your roles are changing, but at the same time, your body of colleagues also change. And so a chief that you may have this time may actually not be your chief 5 years from now, or a chair they may have this time may not be a chair 5 years from now. And that actually changes the culture and the philosophy, and that can actually may have very huge paradigm shifts in the culture and philosophy of the division or department. And at the same time, that also can lead to some degree of uncertainty. What may actually be working well for you now may not necessarily be working as well for you down the road, and vice versa. And I've actually been a recipient, or I've experienced that firsthand, where some things I felt like were going very well suddenly got completely dismantled, due to kind of changes in leadership and operational priorities, as well as in changes in, their funds flows. So those are some of the potential challenges of having, a myriad of responsibilities. And you also have little control of clinical practice. So, we have, as much as I would love to be able to increase efficiency sometimes, or, improve our communication flows with patients, or try to oil the clinical machine a little bit better, I really have no control over hiring and firing, or I can't even reprimand anybody. Not that I would do that maliciously, but you actually tend, in a larger organization, you tend to have a lot less control, because the hierarchy of who actually controls them is then, done by a different department or different set of individuals who have their own priorities as well. And it's almost like you're outsourcing your clinical staff to other departments. There's also a lot of bureaucracy and inherent in larger academic institutions, a lot of bureaucracy. I'm not going to delve on that too much, but that too can consume a lot of unnecessarily wasted time. You're juggling a myriad of responsibilities. When I was younger as a faculty member, I used to, I won't say joke, but I guess in a semi-serious, semi-joking way, mentioned to one of my colleagues that, what, if I didn't care about research, and if I had just had this very unipolar view of what I wanted to out of my career, I think that maybe my stress level would be less. And part of that is because as you also accumulate responsibilities, then also are kind of the added unaccounted for kind of time commitments and stressors, and potential risks for things not going well. And so that is each added responsibility, or each added juggle increases the risk of a ball or a juggling pin to fall. Now, these are maybe a little bit less pertinent to you at the moment as fellows, but over time, particularly if you're more innovation inclined as a faculty member, or more entrepreneurial, if you are to actually have any discoveries or inventions while a faculty member, those inventions are actually owned by the university. And so, you are given exclusive licensing rights if you negotiate that, but you don't necessarily own it per se. I mean, you can still write the patent under your names, but there are negotiations and legal kind of details you have to sort out with your institution. There are also limits on your external commitments. Certain institutions may want to limit how much you get remunerated by, industry or any other sources. They are quite, they're quite rigorous, or at least more rigorous about the Sunshine Act and your external kind of endeavors. And this is all institution dependent, by the way. But the general tenor of academic institutions is they try to protect their kind of reputation and the integrity of what they perceive to be minimizing bias. And so what they try to do is also try to rein in what their faculty members do. And I add the last part about never reaching the carrot, in the sense that sometimes you always feel like there's this objective that you can never reach, and you work very hard, but somehow you're just never reaching what is the objective within academia. So it's either never reaching the carrot, you're on this perpetual hamster wheel, or the goalposts keep changing. So with that, there are of course negatives to academia. Now, this is not doom and gloom, as I also shared with you some of the good things about academia, but why do I stay in it, and what joy do I derive from it? So as I mentioned earlier, there are just these diverse roles. So clinical care, research, education, and administration, and I actually participate in all of the above. And I feel that this academia is an environment where I'm able to kind of delve into, I mean, appreciably into all these different areas. And it actually brings me a lot of joy to be able to do all those things. I do mention about the clinical and research synergy, where I find it very rewarding as well, where patients ask me certain questions. So my area of research focus is nutrition and IBD. So a commonly asked question for patients with IBD is like, what can I eat, or what should I eat? And admittedly, the data out there are actually quite sparse, and there's still a lot to be learned. And so some of our responses are quite variable, and patients do express their consternation, the fact that there's no consensus amongst physicians. They say, oh, this person told me this thing, that person said this is not okay, this person said it's okay, I'm so confused. That's unfortunately the current state of where we are at the moment. But what I actually really enjoy is then bringing in a lot of the research literature and the data, and to show them that, yes, a lot of, embarrassingly so, I can't really give you a straight answer right now, but this is what we know, okay? And I also add to that, this is what we have studied. These are actually data that have come out of our own lab to be able to then kind of inform my response to your question. But at the same time, for all the other questions that patients may ask, where we're like scratching our heads, we don't know what the answer is, or we give them kind of a half response. What we can also do is we can actually take those questions and we can then bring it back to the lab and actually study them. We study it either like epidemiologically, or systematic reviews, or through observational cohorts. It's a little bit harder to do intervention trials and coming up with answers because those usually take years and years. But at the very least, what we do is we actually start that process to be able to then bring back to the patient and share with them about what we have learned and how that applies to them specifically. And I also mention that because what we've also found in our clinical practice is that we're also then taking in even what may be considered preliminary data, or even like still very new or cutting edge emerging data, and actually trying to apply that into practice. So what I've actually observed in the course of, let's say, my brief career is that, we've actually started to use like the biologic monotherapy, when it was more a la mode to do combination therapy. This is before and that was based on some of the the European data, and also even some local data, some published and some not published, on how to actually kind of protocolize that and use that to generate similar efficacy as those with combination therapy. So trying to be a little bit more nuanced in how we apply the decisions of which treatments to use. We also started to use calprotectin before even it came out in the STRIDE consensus statement. So it actually eventually did come out in the second consensus statement. And for those who are not in the IBD world, it's just basically an international body that decided what are good treatment targets for IBD. So we started using some of those beforehand, and now we've also started to use a lot of kind of even dietary therapy before it became more prevalent and more discussed in the GI world. And now we're actually seeing a lot of uptick of nutrition and even collaborations between dietitians and the American Gastroenterological Association. And there are also other ways that we have kind of tried to apply novel kind of therapies or approaches in our care. So we've also found that kind of innovation to be quite, fulfilling. I also added part about innovation. So in the bottom left, there's a little poster that we did where we actually created this artificial intelligence model to actually try to detect food and try to identify food. So that was just a fun project. It was not any meaningful like shift or paradigm shift in clinical care or anything, but we were afforded these opportunities to really kind of engage in also what may be interesting projects, even if it be just as a hobby. I will actually add as well that what's been very fulfilling is the work of being able to work with and collaborate with a large group of individuals, and to actually make friends all throughout the country and even throughout the world with folks with whom I've worked in the past and in the present and at different institutions. And we continue kind of our longitudinal collaboration to be able to really build more from the standpoint of science and discovery, as well as improving our care of our patients. And then it's also very rewarding to see walk at these GI conferences, and then you can come across your students or mentees' poster or attend their oral presentations, and and to see them actually ask all these questions. I mean, just basically just observing them has also been very fulfilling, and see how all this work and effort they've done as a team is now like is not exactly culminating, because that's just a stepping stone, but it's like at least you've reached that milestone of them now actually going out into the public and sharing with excitement and enthusiasm what they have been able to do, what they've learned, and something new that they can share with the world. And then I also find it very enjoyable when I actually give my talks to also, kind of highlight the different projects that they do. And this comes to show that, there's this whole the next generation of leaders who are, and to highlight the next generation of leaders in the work that they do, and how they eventually they too will provide some impact in the world, in our field as well. So briefly, I'll just share a few tips and tricks of how to kind of succeed in academia. I'm intentionally making it a little bit kind of abbreviated, so because there are a lot of general principles that will kind of repeat itself, and I'm trying to make this also generalizable to whatever kind of subsection of academia you want to pursue. But first is to actually identify your focus in your niche. So you want to identify who you are, and what you would be known by. So, right. So, for example, I do a lot of nutrition and IBD. So that's kind of my niche of sorts. I also do a lot of technology in IBD, but I would say that, nutrition is probably kind of the forefront of what I do, at least at the moment. So you want to identify who you are. And then you also want to align your goals with your leadership. It doesn't mean that you have to necessarily bend your interests or bend your goals or career goals with what your leaders want you to do, but it's more so to see like how can you actually share a vision with your leaders, and that would actually then help you be able to then I won't say grease the wheels, but it smoothens the path, and it helps you be able to have some resources at least to be able to kind of build off of what your goals are, and at the very least, you're not going against countercurrents. If you're butting heads with your chief or being completely disparate in your objectives or your vision from whatever your leaders have. Other thing I would say is remain productive. They often say that publications is a currency of academia. I would say that in this modern era, that's not necessarily completely true. Yes, it is a currency, but it's not the only currency. At the very least, what you want to do is you want to generate products, be it academic, be it papers, for instance, be it being active in a community, be it active in giving presentations, or but you want to maintain some degree of productivity and a sense of actually moving forward, right? Not just, and I say moving forward, not just like going on this hamster wheel, but that you actually contribute something that builds off of something, which then builds off of something. And so you're kind of, again, trying to feed your focus or your niche. I say we have to have very thick skin. And the reason why, and I tell this to all the folks, my mentees, including myself, that expect rejection more than expect rejection and rejection and rejection and rejection, unfortunately. And that's kind of, unfortunately, I should have actually added that as one of the pitfalls of academia. We get rejected a ton, right? So you have to kind of build that really thick armor of a skin to be able to kind of withstand those rejections. And by the way, I'm not saying that you can't cry in a corner or feel somber or, want to take a day off or 2 or 3 or 10, whenever you get the rejection. I'm not saying that by any means. I'm not saying that you have to be impervious to rejection. But my point is that we have to be able to at least be able to pick yourselves up above from there and then try again and try again, right? It's a process of having to, and I guess that's my next point, persevering, right? I've already gotten probably thousands of rejections now, and I feel like you hear this death by 1,000 paper cuts, and I wonder whether I'm already like on paper cut number 999, right? And am I like on the precipice of dying, right? So that's how much rejection that you endure, but you just have to keep on moving. You have to keep on going, right? And so that's my other point about this is like a marathon, and we have to have like, incredible patience, right? Don't be discouraged if you don't feel like, okay, you know what, I am there, like, I'm like Uma Mahadevan and IBD. Why am I not there yet? Or I'm not like Bruce Sands or David Rubin, right? Why am I like not there? It's not about, trying to be like the next greatest thing next to slide, other than sliced bread, but it's really just kind of working through this, persevering and being patient to the process. So that actually then brings me to the point is enjoy the journey. Remember, it's a carrot is always seemingly beyond you and never achievable. So what I say is that don't wait for that carrot. Don't just like wait for, okay, you know what, I'm going to achieve this goal. I'm going to get this R grant and I'm going to be like happy. No, what happens is you get that R grant and NIH will tell you, you know what, or your mentors will tell you, no, you need that second R grant. You need that third R grant. The goal will never be achieved. What you need to do is you just enjoy the journey, be productive, just keep pushing forward, just persevere, but enjoy yourself. And the reason why is because otherwise, if you're always just looking for that end goal, you will never be happy in academia. You will always never feel fulfilled. And what actually brings me a lot of joy, as I shared with you previously, is working with the people I'm working with, doing all these different things. I'm just enjoying the journey. Just a few really quick notes. I know we're running out of time. Is network. You build your network of collaborators, very important, internally and externally. What is not very well, it's not taught to us in fellowship, and it was never taught to me in fellowship or even any point in my training. And it's not usually mentioned in medicine because we're not supposed to self-promote, or that doesn't seem to be kind of noble, consistent with a noble vision of academia or even medicine. But unfortunately, there's an element of marketing. I'm not going to dwell into that right now. You can chat with your own mentors and ask them, what does that mean? And what does that mean for me? And above all, again, it's a marathon, and if we want to actually be effective in whatever we do, caring for patients, training our trainees, being effective in research, or even leading, hospital systems, need to take care of yourselves and make sure to take care of yourself, take care of your family, because really, why are we even doing all this, right? I mean, we part of it is a job, part of it's actually provide for our families and ourselves, and for everybody, for our welfare and for helping patients, making an impact in this world. But to be able to really be effective in any of the above, you have to take care of yourself. So with that, thank you very much for your time. It's a pleasure to actually chat with you guys. And Ryan and I would be happy to answer any questions you have.
That was great, Berkely. As someone who is a academic adjacent, I think you touched a lot of nerves and spoke a lot of truth. Great summary.
I would admit, Ryan, though, that your setup at Palo Alto Medical Foundation is a little bit unique, and it's actually very very academic in its construct.
Thank you. Well, that's what we're trying to achieve, but persevere, persevere, persevere is very applicable in any career model.
Yeah, thank you so much for both of your talks. Dr. McConnell, I know some of the things you were speaking about, the different things like, radiology, you didn't have a colorectal surgeon really up front. Are these things that you had thought about and asked your employer when you started, or, and if so, did you just meet with the division chief and go over those questions, or did you ask to maybe speak to some of the gastroenterologists that were working there so you could kind of, low key ask them what the scoop was?
That's a great question. What I didn't tell you is that there was like an aggressive strategy of recruitment where this group came and found me, and then they're like, look, we want you to come for an interview. And I did, and I was very intrigued. And then they're like, we want to offer you a job and we want an answer within 2 or 3 weeks. So like the compressed timeline, I don't know if this is true for every job, and you'll get to this on the talk about contract negotiation, but at some point, like there's a deadline here where you have a job offer on the table, maybe you have more than one, that's like your deadline. You need to figure things out. So I just remember this sort of high stress period of time where I was thinking of all the things that you mentioned, what are the pros of this job? What is missing? Like what would be the pitfalls that aren't in place to be able to do what I want to do? So that's where it was almost like making a list. Okay, we have nutrition, good. We have source of patients, great, but we don't have a colorectal surgeon. I don't know about prior auth. So it's like this scramble where I was trying to figure out, okay, it checks all the boxes at a high level. I'm interested, this sounds good, but now let's get to the detail oriented level, like the nuts and bolts of, will this thing hold water? So I guess that's my advice in general for your career. You're evaluating jobs and opportunities first at a high level. Are you interested? Does it make sense? Do you want to learn more? But if some job is piquing your interest, then really getting granular. thinking about things like, can my radiologist read an enterography? Do they have methylene blue? Like, this is the level of detail that helps make me more comfortable as the answers to these questions sort of came back positively from talking to people the way you suggested. So I think start at high level and then get detail oriented. And then you realize, okay, if the details are more good than bad, you know, this is workable. And I have my list of things that I need to work on and try to build once I get there. So I think that's sort of my model, was high level, then down to micro level.
Thank you. That was very helpful.
And I guess thank you so much for both the amazing talks. For the interest of time, would it be okay if the other fellows reach out, we share your contact information, email?
Yeah, certainly.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Sure thing.
Thanks. This will be recorded. Thanks, guys.
Well, thank you.
Thanks very much.
All right. Thanks everyone for joining. Thanks so much to our speakers. Have a good night, everybody.